The simplest opening I have ever seen in my life, yet incredibly successful. I played for the last 10 years, all from the blitz games, rapid games, up to tournament classical games against very strong grandmasters, and I have got extremely good results, as well as my students that I have shown this opening to. So there are so many incredible advantages of it. First of all, it's called the filter defense. It starts with the move d6, then you play knight to f6, and finally you play the move e5. You fight for the center. The first major advantage is that you can play it against anything and against everyone. You don't care what your opponent is playing, e4, d4, what he does afterwards, knight f3, knight c3. You always and always play d6, knight f6, and then either you play e5 immediately if it's possible, like here, or you first play knight d7, preparing this move, but then you still play the move e5. Now white has a choice. They can take immediately, which is my favorite line. Yes, we are gonna get it. A lot of players are extremely afraid of this endgame because they say the king cannot castle, and this is a huge problem. Like, come on, how can you play that? No, this is actually not a problem at all. You are not obliged to castle once the queens are off the board. There is absolutely no necessity for that. The king is feeling pretty good in the center. Why? Because in the opening you normally want to castle so that your king is safe. Because with the queens on the board, if you are staying in the center, that might be very dangerous. But without the queens in the center, without the queens at all on the board, there is nothing bad that can happen to your king. So staying in the center is completely fine. I want to show you my complete system over here because we have only started. This opening will absolutely change the way you play chess forever, because it's going to be so much easier for you to play chess once you start playing the filter defense. I have created an entire playlist of games that I play in this opening, and I show you what to do against any possible variations that white might try. And I show you exactly how you need to react, and for the most part, this is one of the main advantages. You really do absolutely the same thing. And here, of course, it's an endgame, so it's a little bit different, but you still make this key move c6. Just incredibly important. You want to stop this knight from going forward, and then we're going to launch an attack here on the queen side, and that's how we are going to destroy our opponent. Now, the second advantage, and you can see it now by my opponent's time ticking, is that your opponent doesn't play this opening often. I mean, pretty much never you see this opening if you're playing as white, so people don't expect that. People don't have experience in this opening. Maybe they see it like 1 out of 100 games, but they are not equipped to deal with it the way you are if you're playing this opening on a consistent basis. You understand the ideas so deeper than any of your potential opponents, and that is why you're gonna get a second huge advantage. So we play the move c6, the most important one. Otherwise, this threat bishop takes f6 takes and knight d5 is devastating. But as soon as we play c6, we are completely out of danger. Even more, this knight on c3 is absolutely stupid. It has zero prospects. It cannot go forward, and white is struggling because of it. But they don't realize it up to a very late point in the game, where they do start to care about this knight. It has zero ideas, but then it's way too late. Okay, so now our general idea is to play b5, but we need to be a little bit careful. There are like one trick that your opponent can use here. For example, if he takes on f6 and we were to take it back, he can sacrifice his knight on b5 and then play bishop to d5. I hope you can still follow my variation. Afterwards, this rook on a8 is hanging and it cannot move. So to avoid all of the problems, all we need to do is just play knight b to d7. It literally solves everything. We defend this knight in case it's needed. Although we're always and always happy to take it with the pawn, those pawns would be incredibly solid. And second, we open up the way for our rook, so there is absolutely nothing stopping us from playing the move b5, the very next move. So let's see how we are gonna crush our opponent. By the way, very strong guy, 2266, but I have like nearly 100% score statistics in this particular variation. It's so great to play this endgame, and let me illustrate you why. This is a typical idea. We play b5, and when they come back to b3, we even play the move a5. And now I'm coming to the next advantage you get with this opening. You save so much time. You basically, once you understand the key ideas, and of course this playlist will help you a lot, you just make those moves almost in no time, and that saves you time for the really important parts of the game, middle game and end games. And you see, even here it's like we are already playing the end game, but I can still make my moves instantly just because I understand the ideas of the opening, and that's exactly what you're gonna get if you play this opening constantly. This, of course, goes from the previous advantage that you can play it against anything, you don't really care, and that is why you know exactly what to do. Because if you play some mainstream openings, there you have to like memorize so many lines against different setups of your opponent, and that is stuff that requires a lot of capacity in your brain, that requires a lot of time to like remember all of that during the game. Here, you basically don't have those problems because every single time you play the same thing. Yet, the game is still very interesting. It's really different every time. You have different opportunities, you have different positions, and you just enjoy crushing your opponent here. But for your opponent, it's extremely tough because you see he's wasting a lot of time trying to understand, like, everything seems to be fine, I have developed all of my pieces, everything is good, but what is my plan? My opponent doesn't have any weaknesses at all. He doesn't have any targets, and so he's struggling to find out the plan. Whereas for us, it's so easy to find out the plan. We always and always attack on the queen side. Sometimes when they don't take on e5, then our plan is also to attack in the center. And the c5 square. c5 square is one of the key ones in the fielder defense. We can use it with the knight, we can use it with the bishop, and yeah, that would be stupid not to do that. This bishop, if it goes to b3 again, then we have this a5 idea threatening the move a4 and basically just win the bishop on the spot. Instead, they play bishop d3, but obviously it cannot be great for them, right? They waste tempi. You never want to spend two moves on the same piece without a very, very good reason. And this one obviously is not a great one because he went forward first and now he has to go backwards, which also blocks his rook. Like, this is not what you want to get as white, but he was scared of playing bishop b3 because of a5, a4, b4 coming. And so yeah, from now on we can say we don't have any problems at all and we are starting to play for a win. How do we do that? Well, I really like to place my knight to c5. I just need to think about my opponent's ideas. It doesn't matter which opening you play, it's essential, one of the most important things in chess, and 99% of players under 2000 elo just disregard it or underestimate this major factor. Once you do start to think at least like 40% of your time in a chess game about your opponent's ideas, your level immediately increases so much. So I cannot overestimate the importance of this factor. So if I play knight c5, I have to consider the move f4 because that would attack the pawn. Right now, it's no problem. Like, my knight is on d7, and even if he takes on e5, I'm happy to take it back. I don't have any problems. So maybe instead, I'm gonna develop my bishop here. Because, like I said, you never want to spend more than one tap on one piece without a very good reason. And if you can instead develop a new piece, almost always that would be a preferable choice. Please take this tip home with you. We also can attack this bishop over here, either provoking it to exchange the bishop, in which case, yes, we can also take with the knight and get that pair of bishops advantage, or it has to go backwards, but then again we can attack it even more, and once it goes to g3, we can play knight to h5, relocating the knight to f4 or taking the bishop in the right moment. That feels like a very good plan. And in that case, this knight on d7 is also very useful because it supports the second knight. Of course, yeah, right now we are also attacking the pawn. It's always great to combine several useful ideas for yourself in just one single move. At the same time, we are developing a new piece, bringing it to the game and creating a threat for our opponent, so again, he has a headache. This is the best strategy to outplay anyone in chess. You create as many problems for him or her as possible. But it's essential that you don't want to play so-called hope chess when you play some moves that are not really useful for yourself, just with the purpose to create a one-move threat for the opponent. But if he's smart, he's gonna deal with it, and then you're stuck with that awkward move. Instead, I want you to make moves like that, which are useful, and at the same time they improve your position, and at the same time they create a problem for your opponent. For example, I can even continue this idea and play knight to g4 now, attacking this pawn on f2, because it's very inconvenient for my opponent to deal with it. If he plays rook h2, f1, I can just grab the pawn on h2 and then come back, and that would be very, very good. If he plays f3, well, I can even play knight to e3 or knight to f2, provoking him to exchange the bishop for a knight and getting that pair of bishops advantage. Maybe one thing that I don't really like, if he plays the move rook d to f1, and then next move would be h3, pushing me back. It's not like a big deal, but a little bit annoying. Although, now that I think about it, I have the move g5 there, provoking this bishop to take, but then I'm gonna have knight takes f2, threatening to take the rook, and if it goes away, I have knight takes d3 check, and then bishop takes g1 in that. I hope that was not too difficult for you to follow, but this variation feels extremely exciting. Again, look at how passive our opponent is. He is playing as white, yet we are destroying him in this endgame. The endgame that so many people, for some unknown reason to me, are extremely afraid of. You shouldn't be. This is a great endgame to play, and let's try to crush our opponent with this move, knight to g4. One thing I do want to mention, you never want to blunder this checkmate in one with this bishop and with this rook on d1. Right now, of course, it's not the case, and again, this move knight to d7 helps us a lot, but just be aware of this idea, not to blunder it. Okay, so let's see what our opponent is gonna do. I assume he's gonna just play f3 to try to avoid all of the problems, because this move rook d to f1 and then g5, it does seem very, very unpleasant. Like, yes, he can go backwards, of course, but then he can never play f4, and yeah, I would achieve a lot with that play. Maybe I would prefer in all of that line this knight back to like h5, but I think he would provoke me backwards, and then I'm gonna achieve my goal, because this f4 square would be ideal for this knight to go. Anyway, I like that I have the initiative. Always in chess, your main goal is to make your opponent's life as miserable as possible, because this way he's gonna waste a lot of time trying to deal with your threats. It's going to be difficult for him, so the chances that he's gonna make a mistake are so much higher when you put that pressure on him. And finally, he doesn't have any time to care about his own ideas and plans and threats. So again, in turn, it's much easier for you, because you don't need to handle with his ideas and threats. Instead, he is having a headache because of your threats. And that is why I always support this aggressive play, active play. Yet, remember, we don't want just to like develop a few pieces and go all in with it. We want to bring every single one of our pieces into the game. In this case, yes, this bishop on c8 is still not perfect. It's the time hasn't come for it. Yes, he does go for rook d to f1, but believe me, one day he's gonna come. Normally, it goes somewhere like e6, but of course it depends on the situation, where it's pretty good there. Okay, so my idea was to play g5. Again, if he takes, I'm gonna take here, threatening to take the rook and threatening to take the bishop. So I think g5, and if he just goes back, then I win time and make his pieces much less active, and so this is in every case a very good thing for me. Also, this move f4 is like forever impossible now. One thing you do need to be careful is like if his knight is coming to f5, but because his bishop is stuck there, basically that's not an option for him. Now, how do I continue from here? How do I continue creating threats. h5 you might think is an idea, but I think he plays h3. Now we cannot play h4 because he's gonna take and he has a pin. And if he just go back, then we have taken this square away from our own knight, which is not ideal. I want to play this knight h5, knight f4 maneuver one day. I also don't want to move this knight right now, because then this bishop is attacking the pawn, and once he plays h3, my knight goes away, he's gonna grab my pawn. So instead, I want to make a useful move for myself, and I think that would be the move king to e7. This king, remember what I have told you in the beginning, the king in the center without the queens is a very useful piece, because it controls a lot of squares. It helps me in the defense, because yeah, it can work in all possible directions. And also, it doesn't create a problem for my own rooks. They can be faster connected. I was somehow expecting the move h3, and instead my opponent plays h4, which is very interesting. It's a very active move. The drawback, though, is this knight on g4 is not possible to attack anymore. That is why I thought this is not the move he wants to make. I think I'm gonna just play f6. I don't want to take and again help him improve his bishop. But if he takes, yes, he opens up the h-file, but then I'm kind of ready to play h5, h4. Again, every time he plays f3, this move knight e3 is very, very annoying, and otherwise he cannot get rid of this knight on g4. So I think it's going all of a sudden very difficult for my opponent in terms of having space, having ideas. Like, look, his pieces don't have space, which is very weird. He plays as white, and in the beginning it seemed like he was attacking. But you see that I'm constantly going forward, and for my opponent it's difficult to do anything. Yes, he can play rook h5, attacking that pawn, but this is just one move threat. I can play h6. Next move, I'm gonna play knight d to f6, attacking that rook. The rook has to go away, and then I'm gonna continue playing h5, h4, and potentially just destroy him. Also, that would open up the way for my bishop to go. The only thing, again, to be careful with is this bishop, this pawn on e5, not to lose it, but I'm pretty sure I will be able to do that. Yes, he's going for that. Again, I don't think there is any problem with the h6 idea. Like, this pawn is protected by the knight, so it's not like he can play rook h1 and create a threat for me. In fact, this rook would be in trouble in that case, because he doesn't really have that many squares. He does it the other way around. He starts with the move f3. That makes sense, actually, because now after knight e3, he wants to play rook h1 and really threaten that, that rook on h5. That is interesting. Maybe for that reason I want to play rook knight g to f6, attacking that rook, not giving him time to double along the h-file. Remember, you always and always want to think about your opponent's ideas, and you want to try to stop it. Not only thinking like, yeah, I want to go forward, I want to create the threat, attack the pawn, but yes, that's possible, but in that case you allow your opponent to be active, and that's what he's aiming for, at least to create some kind of threat. And I want to completely not allow him that. So I'm thinking about that, and then he goes back with the rook, and then I play h5 and h4 and achieve my goal. What is the drawback of that? Let's compare it. Here he plays rook h1, I take here, he takes there. Well, his rook in the end of the day will be pretty active there. I don't think I want to allow that. I always want to limit my opponent as much as possible. So I do that. Again, before he's able to double up. Maybe like bishop e3, it's always available for me. This check, I'm not sure how useful that is. Maybe it is useful because in some cases I open up the square on c5 for the knight, but again I have to be careful because this pawn might be hanging. So I think I'm gonna start with h5. If you have a choice between a few moves that you might make, you always want to start with the move that you are 100% sure is a good one for you. And then you proceed with that one which is not that certain. For example, here, I was anticipating that move, but I guess it's completely fine for me to exchange those bishops. Why? Because now there is no pressure against my e5 pawn, and also this rook on f2 is really not that great. Which means I can just play knight to knight to c5 without any problems, anything stopping me. And even the move b4 is possible for me now. Earlier, I didn't want to play it because of this knight a4 move, and the knight, even though maybe not ideally placed, at least doing something useful. Well, here, the knight will not be able to go to a4 because of my knight on c5, so after b4 it has to go backwards to d1. Although, again, I have to think a little bit more long-term. This knight might come to e3, where it's actually going to be better than it was on c3, so maybe I don't need to push it in the first place. g3. Yes, that makes sense. He wants to attack here, maybe play the move f4, but again, it has some drawbacks that I can jump all the way to g4 with the tempo, creating some problems for him. I think I want to finish my development. Remember, doesn't matter what's happening in development, is always and always the key to success, because now my rooks are connected and protected so that I don't have any problems along this h file. For example, if I would have played h4 and my opponent would have answered with g3, I couldn't take here, although, yeah, maybe in this particular case I could, but still now I don't have any problems because the rook is protected there. Now that I think about it, maybe h4 was an interesting idea after all. Yeah, okay, he plays f4, but I thought this move knight g4 is just so great for me. Yes, it's good, like my opponent has to try something active, but it creates so many holes in his camp, which I should be able to use. First of all, he needs to deal with the threat of the rook being hanging. Yeah, okay, he's playing rook to f3, but I can even play rook a to f8 for now, bringing yet another piece to the battlefield. You always and always want to invite every single piece to the party. This is the most efficient way, because the more pieces you use, the more opportunities you're gonna have. It doesn't matter if it's an opening, middle game, end game, always and always try to activate as many of your pieces as possible. Now you see that every single one of my pieces are active. He plays f5, which I anticipated, but like I didn't think it can ever be a problem for me. He's closing the position, which makes it simpler for me. Now this move h4 is always a possibility for me whenever I want it. I don't know, maybe I just play bishop f7 for now. f6 I can just take it, and otherwise maybe I can bring my king to f6 just to block that pawn, and the king, again, it feels very, very safe there, much more useful than that king on c1. So you see that in the endgame the castles might actually be detrimental for you instead of being useful. And yeah, maybe it's time to relocate my rooks over to the d file. Notice that this pawn on h5 is protected by my bishop. Yeah, he plays b4. I actually like that. In terms of like he's trying to be active. I can still take on d3. He cannot take with the rook because of this fork, knight f2. So he has to take with the pawn. But still, he has those space problems, so exchanging the pieces helps him. And also this bishop on d3 is really passive. It has 0 moves to go. So maybe I don't want to exchange it. Maybe I just play knight d7, knight b6, and try to enter the c4 square. I like this idea. The alternative is knight b7 and knight d6 with a very similar idea. But here I also attack that one. Maybe that is even better. Here I have this f6 square, but I don't think I really need it. On the other hand, if I go to d6, I kind of block this d file. So maybe, yeah, maybe I don't like that. Because I had this idea to relocate my rooks to the d file. I don't want to be in a hurry with the move h4, because that gives some space to my opponent and makes my knight on g4 less protected. Why would I do that? I would first optimize my pieces fully, and then I'm ready for some actions going on. So for example, maybe he wants to play a4, and that is another advantage of the move knight to b6 instead of d6. I kind of stop those ideas. He can still try that, of course. But if he seriously is going to play there, then okay, he's not going for it. then he needs to relocate his rook there, and then this h4 potential passer idea might be very, very dangerous. So the passers in the endgame are really great, and I like that I have this opportunity at every single moment, and I'm gonna do that once it's really the time for it. It's always this threat hanging over my opponent's shoulders. Remember, in chess, the threat is so often stronger than the execution. Okay, so now I have those ideas in mind. He probably wants to play knight d3 and get rid of my very good knight. Remember what I have told you in the beginning? He realized that knight on c3 is just horrible, and so now he tries to exchange it. Maybe it's time for knight c4 check. Takes, bishop takes with the tempo, and then I'm gonna get to the d file, which is going to be opened, and my bishop is really great. I like it. Of course, it doesn't mean that I have already won. My opponent still tries his best, and he's a very strong player, but you see that this opening gives you so many opportunities. Even deep into the endgame, you still see the advantages of this strong e5 pawn, of this queenside attack. Our opponent basically didn't have any space at all, and we are going forward on both sides of the board. Okay, knight to c1. You see that he's trying to remaneuver his pieces, which is the right thing, but of course that takes a lot of time. Maybe I can just play knight to f6 now, creating that threat of winning a pawn. I think his idea is relocate his knight to c5, and I have to be careful with that. That can be pretty annoying. So maybe yes, it's time for me to bring the knight back to attack this pawn, because this is like the biggest weakness that he has. And if he plays knight to c3 back, then that's good for me, because this knight on c3 is just very, very bad. And also you see that this time management problem that my opponent has, because he doesn't have that much experience in this opening, that yes, exactly, that is a problem for him now, because he has less than a minute and has to solve all of his problems with this little time. And normally I would have a huge time advantage here, but of course I take it to explain all of those concepts to you, but I still have twice as much time as he has. Okay, I think it's time to bring my rook to the d file. Rooks love the open files. The alternative is to play h4, but he can take and bring his rook. I know, I don't really like that. I mean, I can take with the rook there. That might be an improvement. And just start to play on that passer. Maybe it's time for that, actually. Yeah, maybe it's not really well connected with the move knight to f6. Maybe the knight was good on g4. But I actually like this plan, because now that I think about it, there would be always this bishop f1 idea if he tries to stop me with his rook. Yeah, I think it's important to take with rook, because it's hard for me to place both of my rooks on the h file, and now one is going away and the second will be placed there, and with just one pair of rooks it would be much more difficult for my opponent to create any sort of counterplay. And I hope to make use of this passer now. Yeah, that is why he doesn't go for it. Somehow I wasn't even seriously considering that. I thought that is just not great for him. Yeah, I think maybe rook g8 is a little bit better. I was choosing between g4 and rook g8, but this way I still attack that pawn, and g4 kind of eliminates this threat. But okay, transpose anyway, because now I wanted to play g4 and next move knight h5, and I don't see anything he can do against it. Like, yes, he can bring his knight, but again, it's pretty slow. I already play knight h5 with the tempo, then I can take that bishop, that knight on d3, and bring my knight to f4. Yes. Let me see, maybe he wants to sacrifice. Yeah, that might be important. For example, knight h5, knight xc5. Always and always, doesn't matter how great your idea seems to be, think about your opponent's response and always start with the most active ones, like this capture. And when I take on g3, he has knight g6 check, although I take it, and then I have an extra piece in the end, so that would be good for me. So knight h5, knight f5 takes. If he just takes back, yeah, maybe he still has a pretty good compensation. A lot of pawns there. So I think I don't want to take that risk. I want to go on a safer path here and just remove that strongest piece that my opponent has. Yeah, that is definitely a mistake. Now I achieve my goals without any problems. I get to the position I wanted to get, but I removed this strong idea of knight Xc5 sacrifice. I anticipated rook takes d3 instead, and at least knight h5 wouldn't be with the tempo. Like, doesn't make any sense. Okay, the game is still not over. Can I play g3? Probably I can, why not? If you have a passer, you want to push it as far as possible if you don't lose it, obviously. But here it's well protected, and I think g2 is a serious idea for me. Like, let's say you play knight e2. Yes, I can start with rook h2, kind of improving my rook first, but even g2 immediately is an interesting idea. Okay. Do I lose anything if I start with the move rook h2? Because it's pin on the knight, creating a huge threat of knight f4, so he has to get rid of the pin. And then I play g2, and I say, well, this pawn on g3 is a little bit more protected. On the other hand, like, nobody can attack that pawn, right? If I play g2. So I think I'm not gonna help my opponent to bring his king closer to the center. I'm not gonna help him improve his position. And now even knight f4 is an idea. Because if he takes, I can't even take with the rook. And that knight is very important because it's defending that guy there. So I think I'm gonna go for it. Rook h5. Sorry, rook h1 is another idea. I'm a little bit low on time. But yeah, let's play knight f4. That feels like a very, very strong move, adding yet another piece to the attack. I think both moves are winning, should be winning. Maybe, wait, he cannot play rook f2 because that is also hanging. So this knight is tremendously active on the f4 square, but if you take it, I can take with the rook, and you cannot take it because, yeah, I'm gonna just destroy him with my pawns. And remember how important that was not to help him with that move rook h2 to bring his king closer, because obviously the closer the king is, the easier it would be for him. Okay, he does that. I can even win the piece like that, but I do think I can get more than that by just exchanging. Because where this knight goes, it doesn't have a single square to go. I think I'm gonna just play rook g4, that is the simplest. Because if I play rook h3, the same idea, but after knight d2 and takes, at least he gets this g2 pawn. Now he doesn't. Yes, he can play that, but I think I'm gonna just take and knight f5, yes, the move that he can make. I can either grab all of his pawns or just play knight to e2 or knight h3 immediately. Let me just calculate. Knight e2, knight... Yeah, maybe king to f6, a little bit annoying that he has a check, but that shouldn't... Yeah, maybe it does matter. Yeah, maybe it does matter. Then let me bring my king away first, because I don't think he can really do anything. Like, this is still a threat. And if he plays knight d3, I just play rook g3 attacking that guy. Yeah, d4, okay. But now just knight d2. The same line will be much better for me, because after knight g4, it's no check. And so I will just go away with my knight and promote the pawn. Earlier, that wasn't possible, because thanks to the check, he would have this additional tempo to come back and attack my pawn. But now I can just take. And maybe, yeah, I was anticipating that he's gonna come for... It's actually not that... Like, if I go here, then at least I'm gonna give him this chance. Although, no, I can get back to s3, and then that's not a thing. Maybe d6 is a better move. Yeah, d6 is the best, because he has to take the rook, otherwise he's lost immediately, and once he takes, then he's far away from my king. There are no checks. I hope this game was really instructive for you as my opponent resigns here. This is an incredible opening, and here is the entire playlist where you can learn all of the possible responses from the opponent and how to handle it with the help of Philidor defense.